Now then, guys, we're back for another podcast. So, usually I tend to do them a bit more regular. I've had a bit of time off, mainly due to the fact of because we just recently wrapped up the Muscle and Mind series, which was, it was a good success. I enjoyed doing that series, and what's done is sort of set a lot more future projects out for me. So I've got a couple more collaborations coming up. So the whole podcast series is set to, just level up each time. So today what I wanted to do was just talk about just a couple of gym mistakes that you sort of want to avoid doing, that's only going to sort of hinder progress and stop you from achieving your goals. Now this mainly applies to sort of if the goal is size, if the goal is muscle building, and just overall getting bigger. Just a couple of tips I want to share that you want to avoid when you're going into the gym and in terms of approaching your nutrition. So the first one will be, as we all know, ego lifting. Now obviously many reasons why you don't want to be doing this. There's tons I could go on for hours. But obviously main ones would be you're chasing numbers without the basic understanding of fundamentals of form. So you're chasing, say, 100, 200, 300 kilo deadlift without knowing about scapular retraction, or driving with your heels, or tucking the bar in close to your shins. You see people chasing these numbers, and as you all know, I do personal training full time, so I see this on a daily basis. They're chasing these numbers, and they're putting weight before form. Now, obviously, I'm very into bodybuilding, so I'm aware. I've seen Dorian Yates train. I'm aware that form does slide, but when I'm talking about the ego lifting and the form, we're talking about very bad form, to the point where the back's curved, there's no neutral spine alignment, and the form is just, what I mean, it is shocking. So my next point as well would be within ego lifting, is that it doesn't actually give you gains. All it's doing is chasing like an imaginary thing. So when you do this ego lifting, most people, it's usually within that 1 to 3 rep range. And what those people are thinking of doing is heavy weight, less reps, more size, when essentially it doesn't work like that within ego lifting. Those 1 to 3 reps aren't going to give you the size. If size is a goal, what we need is an effective hypertrophy approach with correct reps and relevant sets as well as rest and recovery. Now, as well as chasing numbers and chasing a concept that doesn't exist with incorrect reps, you're also at a very high risk of injury, which all it's going to mean is delaying your main goal and setting you back massively. Say if you to do a deadlift, you say slip a disc, or do something wrong within the movement, you fail the movement, and you sort of pull a muscle, something like that. All you're doing is putting, let's say, 6 to 8 weeks recovery time, and especially if it's somewhere where there's not much blood supply, we're talking months at a time. Say if you rupture a tendon or something like that, you're really in some trouble there, because all it's going to do is delay what you initially set out to do by doing the wrong thing. So that's something that you don't want to do within ego lifting. And like I say, ego lifting, when people are doing it, size is usually the prize. When they're doing it, think, shit, I want to get bigger. Size, and that's all I'm wanting. In that case, we need to be training the muscle, not the ego. The ego is not a conceptual thing. It doesn't exist. No, ego is not a thing, is it? So when you're training, when you're ego lifting, you're just training something that doesn't exist. So if it doesn't exist, how can it make you bigger? So what we need to be doing is training the muscle, again with a hypertrophy approach, with correct and relevant reps and sets, along with correct nutrition and rest and recovery. Last point with an ego lifting with quality over quantity. Now again, bearing in mind, I am well aware that when we get to those top sets, form may not always be pretty, but it's always in a safe and controlled manner, to the point where the movement is still executed to a good degree. But when it's sort of like real top sets and, like say, incorrect spine alignment, no connection to the muscle, then, quantity is not going to outweigh quality. So you always want to make sure the actual quality of the reps, the execution of the movement is spot on. That sort of wraps it up for ego lifting. As I say, I could go on for ages, but I want to move on to the next point, which would be improper form. And that sort of ties in with an ego lifting, but it's more concentrated on one point. So again, increased risk of injury, no point repeating myself, but time off, no gains. Essentially, you're just going to end up having loads of time off, setting yourself back for what you didn't initially set out to do. The aim is to get big here. We don't want to be injuring ourselves. Another point with improper form, it puts a lot more pressure on the CNS. The central nervous system, it sort of controls all the sort of other body systems within your body. So you put a lot of pressure on that, all it's going to do is delayed recovery and as well decreased performance. Say if you're maxing out every session within that 1 to 3 rep range with bad form, your CNS has then got to deal with the heavy pounding. It's also got to deal with the bad recovery and the improper form as well, which is just going to lead to decreased performance. You're going to be sore, you're going to be injured, you're not going to be able to perform the movement right. It's just not a good thing to be doing. What this does as well with improper form is it encourages bad habit. So it could start off like a snowball effect. So it starts off just, that one set, my shoulder blades came forwards, and then it starts going into your back off sets, and then it starts going into your warm sets. Before you know it, you're performing a whole movement wrong, to the point at once where you was doing a deadlift, say, perfectly, correct spine alignment, pulling from your shins, heels engaged, and you've now lost all that just by letting one set slip terribly. And as well as that, it doesn't develop muscle tissue. What it does is just, it delays what could be if you did it right, if that makes sense. So all you're doing is not building the muscle, you're just delaying the concept what could build muscle if you was to do the movement right. So initially, to save yourself time, just research the movement and chase the weight later. Get your form nailed, understand the fundamentals of training, and go upwards from there. The last one that I want to cover, so like I say, it's not the only one, but the last one that I want to cover will be dirty bulking. Now we'll go into a bit after this that explains sort of like the pros of these 3 points. But dirty bulking, yeah, so main thing would be that it leads to fat gain. You're in a very big calorie surplus, so all that's going to do is lead to a big retention of fat, which when it comes to dirty bulking, so usually with the idea of a bulking, nobody just bulks. One does not simply bulk. You bulk and then transition into a cutting phase. So what that's going to do, that fat gain is just going to lead to a longer surplus. Not surplus, deficit. And obviously, deficits, we don't want to be in that for a long time. Food's decreased, we're feeling low, performance may not be the best it's been, and it's just not what we want, so to say. So obviously, in your off-season or bulk, fat gain is something that you want to keep to a down low, so to say. Sorry. As well, increased health risk, so you've got high cholesterol, heart disease, your CV performance decreases because your body's got to now deal with carrying more weight, handling more weight, and just overall increased body weight. So we've gone over the fact that it delays muscle gain, so to say, and just increases more fat, which means in turn will lead to a longer deficit. But also what it does is it makes that deficit a lot harder, simply because in the gain we got used to eating what we want, was on a seafood diet, was eating whatever we saw, whenever we want. And obviously that's not how it works in a deficit. Food's got to be a bit more controlled, you've got to be a bit more on your game more. And if you've transitioned from a dirty bulk into a cut, you're going to suffer highly because you're not going to want to cut out these foods and you're going to struggle a lot, which is then going to lead to cravings. We all know what cravings lead to. You can only resist cravings for so long. And obviously once you sort of like crumble to that cravings, it leads to overconsumption, which is back at square one and putting us fat. Obviously that's sort of like the negatives point, so to say. There is obviously dirty bulking. If you were doing it for a short term and you was to then sort of go into a mini cut and tidy up your calories afterwards, so there are good elements to a dirty bulking. In my first couple of years I did dirty bulk myself, but that was within moderation. I was still doing my CV training, the fat gain wasn't too high, and it was in a controlled manner and it was sustainable long term. The main aim with these points is it's not sustainable long term. They're not capable of giving the results that you need to get bigger. So that's basically the 3 points I wanted to cover. I'll see how this goes and I'll possibly look into doing sort of like margin mistakes that you don't want to be doing. So we'll wrap it up for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. So I've got some sort of PTs, check-ins to do with online clients, and a couple of social media posts tonight, so you'll see me about after this. And yeah, have a good day. Let me know what you think about it. Next podcast will be coming soon. Hopefully be a collaboration. Have a good day, guys.